Hello, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. My name is Melissa Reich, and I am your host, aka your Bish Therapist. I am a licensed therapist turned pop culture aficionado, here to serve clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about the mess that is currently happening between Kim Biermann and Kroy Biermann. As most of you know or have seen, there has been so much news, police body cam footage, court records, all of these things that are kind of outlining the situation, the very, very sad situation that's happening right now between Kim and Kroy. So I have some theories and some interesting clinical interpretations that I wanted to share. It's specifically how I have a theory about how Kim's health issue may have led to the current state of affairs. So hopefully that's very interesting to you. I'm also going to talk about something called financial infidelity, which is something that a lot of folks maybe never heard of. Fun fact, in my early career, I was actually a gambling prevention specialist. I was certified, I had credentials. I didn't pay to keep those up because it wasn't an area of practice that I wanted to continue. However, I have a great deal of knowledge about gambling addiction. And, I also worked in an inpatient residential treatment facility for drug and alcohol. So I have a lot of information about addiction, epigenetics, financial infidelity. And so I'm here to share that all with you. Now, after this, I did a little poll on my Instagram, and it seems that most people did want to hear about this. So I am going to talk about it, which is over the weekend. I experienced a really scary road rage situation in which I had to call 911. And so, for me as a therapist, I am trained and I thrive in crisis situations. I just do. I'm really good at staying calm and things like that. So, for me, I was able to do some things to help keep myself safe. And it occurred to me that it might be great to share my experience and give you all some tips if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. So, and excuse me, pardon my sinuses today have been a little bit crazy and I'm just doing the best I can. So, pardon some of my throat clearing. Now, before I get into any of this, I want to tell you all something that is just so shocking to me. And Amy Phillips. So, for those of you who don't know who Amy Phillips is an extremely talented voiceover artist, housewives aficionado. She does housewives impressions. She's a comedian. She's an actress. She's just so amazing. And for those who are new to this podcast, Amy is actually how I got my start. Amy has a podcast on Patreon. It's called Drama Darling, and it is wonderful and it's so entertaining. And if you have not heard of it, please go, check it out on Patreon. She's so wildly funny. But how your Bish therapist started, I talk about this in episode 0, episode 1 on my YouTube channel, and also on the podcast. It's an episode called The Maiden Voyage of Your Bish Therapist. So you can go ahead and listen to that. I talk a little bit about where I get my name and things like that. However, I just want to be clear that I wouldn't have the opportunity to do what I'm doing now if it were not for Amy Phillips. I was just a regular listener and we connected via, DMs, and she found me funny. She loved that I was a therapist. I had some good takes on things. So she had me on the show. And when I was on her show for the first time, your Bish therapist wasn't even born. She wasn't even a thing. I had my personal Instagram profile that was private. I had nothing to promote. And through the process of continually being on her show, I got a lot of great feedback, a lot of people wanting me to go out on my own. And of course, Amy was the biggest support of that. So I just want to be really clear about that. Amy and I are separate, but I wouldn't be here without Amy, without the drama darlings, without the support of, just everybody. And so what I'm here to announce today is that I somehow made it to the top 200 podcasts rankings, which is among all podcasts, and it includes international data and things like that. I'm number 174, and I'm just so surprised, but also so grateful, so humbled, and so overwhelmed. So the reason I'm sharing it truly is just to say thank you to all the people, my friends, my community, people who have been there since day one. Amy Phillips, thank you, thank you, thank you for making this possible. I mean, in my wildest dreams, I could have never imagined. So I am just really excited, really grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you wondering how you can help, if you, so there's a couple things. What I realized is that listening to the podcast is great, but what really matters is subscribing. So, and also subscribing to the podcast is a great way to never miss a episode of Your Bish Therapist. You just get reminders and things like that. So if you are a listener and you're listening on podcast, please go subscribe or follow. Please go ahead and leave a 5-star review. And I also have a YouTube channel it's the podcast, but it's full video of me. I make a lot of wild hand gestures, and I definitely do a lot of interesting facial. My face does gymnastics. So if you're interested in that, go over to my YouTube and please subscribe to that as well. But thank you, thank you, thank you. I am still processing this, and I'm just really grateful. Okay, so now on to the Kim and Kroy of it all. So for those people who, I get a lot of messages from people, which is also an honor in terms of them telling me that they don't even really watch Housewives, or they don't necessarily follow or watch what I'm talking about, but they just enjoy my podcast, which again, I'm just bowled over. I'm so grateful and humbled by that. So what I'm going to do is, for those of you who are familiar with Kim and Kroy, that's great. If you're not, I'm just going to share some information about their courtship. And everyone who knows me now knows that I love to be very prepared. I love a timeline. I love information. I think it's, even for those of us who have watched Kim and Kroy, or Kim from season 1, episode 1 of Real Housewives of Atlanta, it's just a good reminder of maybe how we've gotten here. So Kroy Biermann he is like a good old Midwestern boy. He was raised in Montana. And the reason why that's important is because I am from a suburb of Chicago. I was born and raised in a suburb of Chicago called Downers Grove. And so what I can tell you is that being a Midwesterner for most of my life, Midwestern folks, it's a different culture. It's a different world, certainly than LA. So there, Kim Kroy's parents didn't like Kim, and it now, a lot of it makes sense because, Kim's values and the culture that she was living in were just so different from Kroy. And I think that they were worried that would be a disaster. And look, it is. So Kroy was raised in Montana. He played football growing up in Montana, and then he got drafted to the NFL. He played for the Atlanta Falcons from 2008 to 2015. And then in 2016, he was traded to the Bills, but he was just practice squad and he never played. And then he was released. So those are Kroy's stats. Kim Zolciak, for those of you who maybe need a refresher, she was on the Real Housewives of Atlanta from season 1 to season 5. And those seasons were 2008 to 2012. In the early seasons of The Housewives, Kim was best known for her really terrible wigs. She wore these wigs that really looked just really synthetic, really fake, and her presentation. So she was really like 29 when Housewives started, but if you look back at old episodes, she looks so much older because of her makeup and the hair and all that stuff. Um, which the reason why I bring that up is because I think that Kim has always had some body dysmorphia issues. And for those of you who don't know what body dysmorphia is where your view or perception of your physical appearance, your body, things like that is warped. It is not an accurate perception of what other people see. And women especially struggle. I mean, men can struggle with that, of course, but women especially are really susceptible to that. And so in the first seasons, it was apparent to me anyway that Kim was just working really hard to be viewed as beautiful because she felt that that gave her a lot of value. But the major thing about Kim in the early seasons that she was known for is being in a relationship with a man that she called Big Papa. And Big Papa, she claimed it was this, it was just like a false name. She claimed because he was a celebrity. And it turns out that he wasn't so much a celebrity. He was just a rich guy who had a wife and was actively married. And so, she tried to use semantics to skirt accountability, which, a lot of our Bravo Lebs do that. And I call that out frequently. When it came out, his name was Lee Najjar. I hope I'm saying that right. Lee, Najjar. Um, so it, all of Nene's, like her big lines, close your legs to married men, that came from Kim's relationship with Big Papa, because she insisted that he wasn't really married. And in fact, Big Papa proposed to Kim, but he definitely was still married. So it caused a lot of upset, obviously, with fans and with her co-stars, with Nene and people like that, because, people did not think it was cool what was going on. Kim knew that he was married, and, it was, kind of a whole thing. So Kim and Kroy met on the show. So they met on Real Housewives of Atlanta. Kroy was doing a charity event in which it was like some sort of a Dancing with the Stars. It was local in Atlanta, and he wasn't even supposed to be there. But someone dropped out, and then they asked him last minute, and Kim actually was dropped off to that event by Big Papa. And she met Kroy, and it was sincerely all caught on camera. And honestly, when you saw them meet, you could tell there was just fireworks. There was a lot of chemistry there. So I think for people who are surprised about what's happening now, it's because we got to see their love story unfold on the Real Housewives of Atlanta. We saw them meet, we saw the sparks fly. We watched them fall in love. We watched Kroy become a father figure to Kim. Has two daughters outside of her relationship with Kroy. So she was with two different gentlemen before Kroy. And so she has a daughter, Brielle, the oldest, who's 26, and Ariana, who's 21. So when Kroy came in the picture, he loved this woman. He loved these girls. You could just tell he was just a good dude. And, Kim tended to date a lot of people who probably didn't deserve her. Because Kim, she had a lot of great qualities. She was a nurse. Sincerely, she was a nurse, and she is smart. And I think she, has a lot of talents. She had a singing career in Real Housewives of Atlanta that I can confidently say she's not great at that, but somehow she took not being a great singer, and she did have a huge hit, which is Tardy for the Party. And honestly, if you have never heard that song, you should listen to it because it is pretty catchy. So listen, I give Kim credit where credit is due. But so we see her and Kroy fall in love, and eventually on the show, so in the fifth season, or maybe a little bit before, Kim got pregnant, and we saw her and Kroy, and now she's pregnant with her first child with Kroy. And in the middle of the fifth season, you could just tell Kim always had a reputation for just feeling like sometimes there was some entitlement there, feeling like she was better than the girls on Real Housewives of Atlanta. She didn't have to film. She didn't have to go on trips. Like, she was always exempt from doing things. But here's what's fascinating. So before she got pregnant with her son, KJ, Kroy Jr. So, okay, so first, before I discuss that, let me say, so there's Brielle, who's 26, there's Ariana, who's 21, okay, and those are from Kim's relationships before Kroy. Then Kroy Jr., aka KJ, he's 12. Then there's Cash, he's 11. And then there are twins, Kaya and Kane, who are 9. Now, before she got pregnant on the show, Kim, and most people forget about this, Kim had a stroke. It was a surprise. I think she was flying something, and forgive me for not knowing the exact details. There's a lot of moving parts here, but she had a stroke suddenly, and it really impacted her. And so some of what we got to see in season 4 and 5 was Kim talking about being scared because she had a stroke. She was scared to fly. She was also very pregnant at the time. And so she was trying to get out of this girls' trip. And Kim, literally, there was like a dinner that they were having. The ladies confronted her, and she just walked out. She pushed the camera away. She took her mic off, and she said, "I'm done. I have this beautiful new man. I have this beautiful new family. I don't need any of you. I'm out. Deuces." So obviously she was not really popular with the ladies because, she just always felt like, it seemed like she felt like she was better than everyone, and she didn't need to, she didn't need this gig that gave her all of her opportunities. So Kim had a wedding episode. So after she left the Housewives of Atlanta in the 5th season, she had a wedding episode. And also, this is interesting to note, her and Kroy were married on 11/11/11. And so for those of you who know Kim, you know that she is very into kind of the spiritual realm. She had this psychic named Rose who was just really wildly accurate. She predicted that Kim would have more children. Unfortunately, Rose has passed. May she rest. But Kim was always really into spiritual stuff. And 11/11/11, for those who aren't privy to what that means, is it's kind of like what you would call it an angel number or a spiritual number. Again, you can look that up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But so for Kim, that was a really important day. And then after the wedding episode, she had a reality show with Kroy and the rest of the kids, because at that point, all the kids had, I think, been born. But here's what was shocking to me. Her series, the family series, it was called Don't Be Tardy. It was 8 seasons. Her show lasted 8 seasons. And I had to go back and look at that. I'm like, wait, that can't be right. 8 seasons? Yes. 8 seasons of watching Kim and Kroy and the kids. And then in the later seasons, they went on an RV and they took trips. This was in 2020. During COVID, and in 2020, the show was eventually canceled. However, there were a couple things that happened on that show and in Housewives that, people who listen to me know enough to know by now that I get these little things that aren't meaningful to other people, but they stick in my therapist brain, and that usually means they're really important. So I have some moments like that with Kim, and I'm going to share those with you in just a bit. So in April of 2023, after about 12 years of marriage, everyone was shocked when Kim and Kroy filed for divorce. And shortly after they initially filed, they called off the divorce to make it work for the kids. And then since that time, they have refiled, I believe once, maybe twice. And there have been multiple 911 calls, police body cam footage that's been released. And it just shows the very raw, very scary, very concerning situation that's happening at home. And so what I think is fascinating and why I shared all the timeline with you is we go from seeing this kind of fairy tale true love romance, and you're like, well, how did it turn so dark? Well, I'm here to tell you how that happened, because I know exactly how it happened. Kroy has come out and he has said that Kim has a gambling addiction, that she has gambled away all of their money. I'm just repeating the things that Kroy has said, that she also has an addiction to shopping. She has trouble with compulsive behaviors. She has a trouble with pathological lying. And that initially, when they were trying to make it work, Kroy felt that maybe they could do therapy. And guess what? Kim really wanted no part of that. I think Kroy saw that, oh, she's not well. She's not aware of it. She's not willing to accept feedback on it. She's not willing to go to counseling. She's not willing to change. And I believe that's why divorce was filed for again. Because the thing of it is that when we love somebody, when they develop an addiction or a mental health issue or just start acting uncharacteristic or having a hard time, whatever it is, the love doesn't go away. It's really scary to be a partner of someone in that situation, because it's like you're being gaslit. It's like, where's this person that I used to know and love? And I know she's in there somewhere. And I do truly think what's happening here is that, this is my interpretation, that Kim had the stroke. Okay. And for those of you who maybe you've listened to my podcast before, maybe you haven't, but I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. So I had ovarian cancer when I was 17. I was not supposed to survive that. Miraculously, I did. And I am now managing a chronic cancer that there's no cure for. It's kind of with you forever. It's called CLL. So the reason why I bring that up is I have had an immense amount of medical trauma that created a complex post-traumatic stress disorder for me, and was really, really challenging to deal with. So the reason I am sharing that is that I understand what it is to have all of a sudden your world pulled, the rug pulled from underneath you. Someone, something horrible has happened to you. You realize you have no control over your body. You have no control pretty much over anything. And it can really, really rattle you. And I'm someone who is, very humble and grateful and self-aware. And so if it could pull the rug out from me, it can pull the rug out from anybody, sincerely. So I believe that Kim's stroke led to an unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder. And what happens when we have an unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder that we're not acknowledging and we're not receiving help for is things start to come out sideways. And this is where we will start to see some addictive behaviors, some behaviors that are coming out sideways. So I believe that Kim, since the beginning, Kim always had how shall we say, she always really liked to spend money. She loved to shop. And when she had Big Papa, she would always brag about, I can buy whatever I want and he pays for it and things like that. So when you're buying whatever you want and someone else is paying for it, that's one thing. But when she married Kroy, Kroy was no longer in the NFL. I think she thought that their money was just never going to go away, which is really silly because even the most successful people will tell you have to be smart about it. You have to invest it. You have to save it. You have to do all these things because, money just doesn't grow on trees, no matter how successful you are. And if you spend more than you make, I mean, that's just simple math. So I think that, Kim had these predispositions for, shopping compulsion. I think also she had this kind of body dysmorphia. She had some stuff going on even way before the stroke. Okay. Which clearly she didn't deal with. And, sometimes a lot of people think that stuff will solve it, but stuff just, it fills a hole for temporarily. And then usually people with shopping addiction will say it's like any other addiction where, the process of looking for something and maybe wanting to buy it, it does seriously give you a high like a substance will. But then when you get that thing, you feel so empty because what you hoped that thing would do, it's not capable of doing that. Stuff can't fill a hole. Only true love, support, personal growth can do that. So I think that those things were just left unchecked. And then when Kim had this stroke, I believe that she developed some post-traumatic stress disorder that was left unchecked. And when it's left unchecked, that turns into a complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is much harder to treat and to recover from than a typical post-traumatic stress disorder. However, for those of you listening, I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder and I work on my recovery every day and I've never been happier. So don't fear if that's a diagnosis. Recovery and health and healing is possible. I am living proof. But I just think Kim didn't give herself the opportunity to process it as much as she needed to. And so over time, I could sincerely see her just shrinking and becoming more and more unhealthy. And one of the interesting things that I want to share about this is that in their Don't Be Tardy show, it was I think it was 2020, it was the last season. They were in an RV and they were going to all of these places. And so one thing I noticed is that Kim and the girls, they were camping and they were doing full glam. They were going to Walmart and they were doing full glam. So what does that tell me? That tells me that there's some insecurity and there's a necessity to make yourself look put together on the outside because you're really not feeling together on the inside. So that was something interesting I noticed. But the biggest thing that I noticed was Kim and Kroy, they were driving somewhere and Kim saw a sign for a casino and she became like a child begging Kroy to let her go gamble. And as soon as I saw her eyes and her approach towards that, I was like, I knew that gambling, I can't say it's an addiction. I don't know Kim. She's not my client. That's not appropriate. But I could see that it was a problematic thing for her based on her she had an addictive reaction, because don't forget, I've worked in residential treatment facilities for addiction. And I am accustomed to seeing that look in a person's eye. An addictions therapist, we can tell it instantly. And I could see that in her eye, number one. But number two, Kim made a comment that bowled me over, which was she lost $250,000 gambling. but she said it in a way that was braggadocious. And I just thought to myself, oh, yikes. I mean, at this point, they have how many kids? They have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 6 kids. Okay. So they have 6 kids, and $250,000 is a lot of money for college, weddings if they choose to get married, clothes, stuff that kids need. Having 6 kids is really expensive. So when she just casually dropped that, A, and B, she seemed like she was kind of bragging about it. But the thing that I know as a gambling prevention specialist, the C, I will tell you right now is that whatever a gambler is willing to admit that they lost, it is likely many, many, many more times, probably times 10. Okay, so if a gambler is saying, I lost $100, it's probably 1,000 or more. There is a denial and a minimization with people with gambling addiction that I have gotten to see with my own 2 eyes, and it is and that for me, that's why I have a hard time working with it, because it's just really challenging, and it's really hard, and it's really sad. But my point is, if Kim is willing to admit that she lost $250,000 gambling, I guarantee she lost multi millions of dollars. And Kroy has essentially come forward and said that they are broke because Kim has spent all of their money. I personally believe that 1,000%. If she hadn't said this on TV and I hadn't watched it, I would think, okay, well, maybe there's a chance. No. Kim's relationship with money and relationship with shopping and relationship with reality are very unhealthy. They're very unhealthy. And so that leads me to talk about Kim has this motto, ask, believe, and receive. And I really want to talk about that because there's something called external and internal locus of control. So her motto of ask, believe, and receive is what's called an external locus of control. And I'm going to explain what that is. So if you have an external locus of control, you believe that what happens to you is the result of luck or fate or determined by authority figures. So the problem with this is that you do not believe that you are capable or competent of creating your own way, that it is all up to luck, up to, your angels, your God, your universe, whatever it is that you believe, it is up to that and not up to you. Now, an internal locus of control is where you believe you're in control and you take responsibility for your own actions. Okay. So the truth of the matter is that as humans, we get nothing without taking action and working for it. That's just how it goes. That's just life. There are people out there who want to believe that they're shortcuts and who maybe take them and they've been somewhat successful. But trust me, long term, that belief is just going to make you really unhappy because your happiness then depends on these external forces. That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for depression, for unhappiness. And Kim's ask, believe, and receive to me shows that she just believes that things will fall in her lap. And listen, it seems like they have a little bit. But Kim is minimizing and in denial of the harsh reality that only Kim can solve Kim's problems. Body cam footage showed Kim, saying, well, Kroy just needs to work. And it's like, oh, yikes, what do you mean he just needs to work so that you can spend all of that money too? Like, there's no awareness, there's no personal accountability, there's no acknowledgement that she is responsible for part of this issue. And when I see that, I can tell that she is really unwell, and it will take something really significant for her to either get into treatment. I don't think she'd be willing to do it. And I think it would really take kind of like not a rock bottom, but something that leads her to understand that this is not healthy for me. I think that right now, Kim has a lot of denial and minimization. She has a lot of trauma. She has a lot of things that are making, and it makes it hard for people to be empathetic towards her. I'll give you that. I have empathy because I've seen this before. I've seen people come into treatment, be so sick like this, just really entitled and rude and all of these things. And then they get sober and then they work on themselves and they're a wholly different person. So I have empathy for Kim because I think there can be a good person in there. But right now, that person is not able to be accessed because her brain is hijacked. I believe, my opinion. The other There was another moment where Kim, it was during the Real Housewives of Atlanta, I believe, or maybe Don't Be Tardy. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was this moment that came years and years before all of this. And I knew in my head, I was like, this relationship is not going to work. So I'm going to tell you what that is and how I knew it. Um, Kim had just had one of her kids. I don't know if it was the youngest kids. I don't know if it was the middle. I don't remember who it was. But Kim Kroy and the kids were getting ready to go on vacation, and Kim was obsessed with buying Louis Vuitton luggage for the children. You know, because all kids need ridiculously expensive, overpriced luggage. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Louis Vuitton. I am fortunate enough. I have one Louis Vuitton purse I was able to obtain for myself. I do like Louis. I think they're lovely, but the luggage is incredibly expensive. And let's be real, it wasn't for the kids, it was for Kim. She just loves having designer stuff. I think that she feels like she's not valuable, so she's going to drape herself in valuable items, and maybe then she'll feel valuable, which that doesn't work either. But anyway, so her and Kroy were having this discussion, and Kroy said, no, this is too much money. We don't need it. I mean, and he was just being really practical, and he made really practical points. And guess what? Kim did it anyway. And she lied to him about it. She did it behind his back. And when it came and he realized it came, he confronted her about it. And she just said, well, I did it. Too bad. And he just had nothing to say about it. And it was in that moment that my therapist brain knew that this would be an eventuality, to be honest. And again, let me explain to you why that's so significant. Okay. There's a term called financial infidelity. And there's a lot of different types of infidelity in a marriage. There's, physical, there's emotional, there's different types. And most people don't know about financial infidelity. And financial infidelity is when couples who have combined finances, and that's a key. If you and your partner have separate finances and it's understood that you're responsible for making your own purchases, well, then that's different. But if you have a combined finances, you have joint accounts, and you are making purchases and you are not being honest with your partner about that, that is financial infidelity. Now, I'm sure most women listening to this are having a panic. I don't necessarily mean if you buy a couple decorations at Target and maybe you're not super honest with your husband about that. I may have done that once or twice, but here's the sincere thing is that, I think there's things that everybody does. Maybe, a hack that I've heard sometimes women use is when you're checking out somewhere, you get a gift card for, somewhere to go for dinner. And then, you tell your husband, hey, I have this gift card. Let's just go to dinner. But really you bought it. See, those are little things. And in all sincerity, I do encourage if you're hiding stuff like that, just maybe think about what may be going on, why you don't feel comfortable talking to your partner about it. I'm not shaming you. I'm just saying it's good to look at. But what financial infidelity, when you're spending large amounts of money and large to you, right? So I'm a regular middle class person. Okay. So a large amount of money to me is like $200, $100, $200. That's a lot of money to like a regular person. Okay. Louis Vuitton luggage sets are thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So Kim's, feeling like she's entitled to these things just because she wants them, and not having respect for Kroy's concerns or point of view, and the financial infidelity piece of it is, to me, you just can't I knew they wouldn't be able to sustain the relationship long term. And I also knew that is not, it wasn't like a one-off situation. You knew that Kim had done that a lot, and, it just was unsustainable. In my opinion, as a regular middle class gal, watching Kim spend money, it made me sweat, because it's like, again, unless you have a money tree in your backyard, it doesn't matter how famous you think you are, or how many seasons of Housewives you're on, or if your husband's a football player or whatever. That money isn't going to last forever. And especially when you have 6 kids. She just like did not ever consider the practicality of that. And that always told me that her brain was already hijacked. So then I think after the stroke happened, it just got hijacked more. It was a whole thing. So let me look. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to mention regarding all of this is epigenetics, because I did an episode, which you can find on my link tree on my Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, please go do that. It's Your Bish Therapist, YOURBISH therapist. I had posted an episode that I did with Amy about epigenetics and addiction and Kim and things like that. So I do want to just share a little bit about addiction and epigenetics, because I think it kind of, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a really interesting field of study for me. So epigenetics, to break it down, because it's a very complex topic, but it's a newer area of research that talks about how genes meet environment. Okay, so growing up in my master's program, I have my master's degree in clinical psychology. And when I was in grad school, there was a lot of talk about nature or nurture. And the fact of the matter is, it's both. It's always both. Always both. It's not an and or situation. It's nature and nurture. So the best way that I've heard this epigenetics described is, I want to share it with you, because it can help you all kind of wrap your brain around what this is that, so genetics load the gun. And yes, I'm using an example for a gun, and you're going to see why. So genetics load the gun. Okay, we have just our genetics that we're born with, and that loads the gun. And then things like environmental toxins, stress, nutritional deficiencies, unresolved trauma pull the trigger. Okay. So genetics loads the gun, and all of these other things can pull the trigger. Okay. So when we look at addiction, it's very nuanced and it's very complex. I believe that Kim had some genetic predispositions. We have gotten to see her mom and her dad over the years, and how they've had a really contentious relationship. Now they don't talk. And so there's a lot of stuff there. So I believe that Kim had some genetic predispositions, and then the stroke and the unresolved trauma of the stroke pulled the trigger for her epigenetics to really all kind of light up and create some addictive tendencies, to create some problematic tendencies along the spectrum of problematic gambling, drinking, shopping, things like that. The bottom line is, Kim is not well, and her brain is hijacked, and I'm concerned, and I have a lot of empathy specifically for Kroy and the kids, because these children need to be protected. And, the other issue is that the epigenetics that I just described, well, kids could also be victims of having that trigger pulled, right? Because if they have those same genetics that Kim has, and they're undergoing trauma, because whatever Kroy is trying to do to protect these kids, they're being exposed. They're seeing their mom, calling police or sleeping in the guest room or having police called. That is traumatizing for kids. So my hope for the kids is that, Kroy is getting them the support that they need in whatever way works for that family, that the kids are being protected, because my concern now is for those turn on and, they don't have issues down the road. Because, and here's something that is really great with epigenetics is that when the expression of the gene is turned on, there are interventions and things that you can do to turn it off in a way that you can't with genetics. Genetics is genetics. So when the gene is turned on genetically, it's turned on. In terms of the expression, there are things that you can do. So I share that again to give you hope and understanding that there are these things that we can turn the clock back on if we get the proper assistance with it. Okay. So I send so much love to Kroy, so much love to their kids, and honestly, even love to Kim, because I think that, again, I have a lot of compassion for people who are struggling with medical trauma, who are struggling with addiction. They're humans. They're humans. And, I understand her behavior is really polarizing right now, and I get it. But personally, you know me, I think all humans deserve to be happy. I don't think Kim is inherently a bad person. I think she's a sick person. So I have empathy. I understand if you're not there. Fair enough. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is kind of do a little turn and talk about, for those of you who don't want to hear about my experience with this, you can dip out now, no problem. I'm sorry I used that term. I was kind of making fun of the whole Scandival thing, but anyway, I had a really frightening road rage experience that I ended up calling 911. And so the reason I want to share it is to share some tips and tricks on, because I am really good in a crisis, I was able to keep my head about me and keep myself safe. But so I wanted to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. And it also leads me to talk about something. It's called the bystander effect. And this is one of the things I learned about in college. So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, but I also minored in sociology. Sociology is essentially the study of groups. Okay. And one of the first things I learned about, in sociology is the bystander effect, which is horrifying. And I'm going to explain what it is. So the bystander effect occurs when the presence of others decreases the likelihood of an individual intervening in an emergency. And the more people that are present, the less help the person who needs it gets. Because what happens is if you're in a crowd of 1,000 people and you hear gunshots, you think, oh, well, there's tons of people here. Someone will call the police. But guess what? Everybody thinks that. And then no one calls the police, and then somebody dies or something happens. And when I learned about it, I just remember being horrified and being like, what? Struggle, especially in today's world, to really want to help other people. If you need help, don't yell help, yell fire, because people will respond to fire and they will ignore help, which is so gross. And I'm just like, ugh. Listen, if I'm around, I'm never going to ignore it. I'm always the person who will break the bystander effect, because as soon as I learned about this in college, I committed. I'm like, I will never be that human. So if I hear gunshot, I went to my graduate program was in Philadelphia. I walked out in the evenings. I heard gunshots quite a bit. I would always call 911. I'm sure maybe other people did, maybe they didn't. But I am not going to be a weak link in the chain of helping somebody. Never think that someone else is going to do it. You've got to do it yourself. Okay. So that's the first thing. So essentially, I'll break down what happened here. I live in Pennsylvania, and there is a main interstate called Interstate 81 that goes all the way from here basically to California. It is a main interstate. It is, all the trucks and that bring us all the things that we need and we use and we eat and all that. It's the main artery for all of it. And I have to take 81 every day of my life because I live in a small area and I have a crazy amount of medical appointments on a daily basis. Sincerely, it's a full-time job. So I have to take 81 to go, up north, south, whatever, to go to these appointments. And on this occasion, I was merging into the left lane. And before I tell you what happened, I will say in the area in which I live, there is a strange amount of entitlement in terms of people feeling like they own the road or they own a lane, or if you it's a very strange area. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. I've lived in Philadelphia for 10 years. I lived in Allentown. I haven't lived where I live now for the majority of my life. And I'm glad I haven't, because it's just there's a lot of weird drivers. Okay, so let me put it that way. There's a lot of weird drivers. And so I'm merging on into the left lane, and I'm making sure that I'm not cutting anybody off because A, that's not nice, and B, people hate that. So I'm merging into the left lane, and there was a car that was all the way behind. And the reason that I noticed it is because it looked like one of those cars that looks like a police car, but it's not. In this area that I live in, we see a lot of those. So a police car will go to auction. Somebody will buy it. They'll keep the light on it. It's like very shady. And I don't know how that's allowed, but it just is. So being someone who is always trying to keep myself safe, when you have a history of trauma, I'll be honest, I do tend to be hypervigilant. And so I pulled in the left lane, and this car that was an old police car, but it clearly wasn't a police officer driving it, all of a sudden is up so close to me that I can no longer see their lights. It looks like if I slowed down even for 1 second, he would have been in my car. So I thought, okay, well, I know I didn't cut him off, but for some reason he has taken umbrage to me getting into the left lane. Fine, I'm going to get into the right lane. And as soon as I get into the right lane, it was a male. That's all I could see. This person came right into the right lane, right behind me, and again got so close to me. And I knew in that moment that I was in trouble. I didn't know. It didn't do anything, but it didn't matter that I didn't do anything. This person perceived whatever they perceived that I did. Clearly, they were really angry about and wanted to teach me a lesson. And I'm not sure what that lesson was. But anyway, so I get so scared because, again, I'm just afraid he's going to hit me, that I get back into the left lane. And sure enough, he gets back into the left lane right behind me. So at this point, he's essentially stalking me, and I cannot get away from him. And my heart's racing and I'm terrified. And so because I am good in a crisis situation, and because I am good at remaining calm in the moment, I had the wherewithal to drive up far enough. And then in the right lane, there were 2 cars, and there was enough space for me to get in between the 2 cars in the right lane. And there wasn't enough space for him to get in. So I did that to protect myself. Because the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to pull over. If that's your instinct, don't do it, because he could get out of the car and do God knows what. So I knew I couldn't do that. So I pull in between these people, and he's unable to get behind me. But what he does is he pulls up next to me, and the windows are so tinted. All I can see is like the outline of like a bald head. That's how I knew it was a male. But I couldn't see anything else. And I thought to myself for a second, this person's going to shoot me. Is this how I'm going to die? I'm going to survive cancer twice to die like this on 81. Oh my God, it was so scary. And so he sat there, and I thought to myself, well, I I need help here. The people around me, I'm sure, weren't going to help. And that's why I talked about the bystander effect. Everyone around me saw what was going on. And I don't necessarily know what they could have done to help, but nobody helped me. And so what I did was I had my phone out, and here's the thing. You shouldn't text and drive. You shouldn't be on the phone and drive. But in these situations, you need to make sure you have your phone handy, because what I did was I called 911 and I had it on my phone screen. And what I did was I put it to the window so that the guy who was stalking me could see it. And as soon as he saw that, he sped right away. Okay. So I was on with 911. I was able to, because at that point I was just pissed. And so when it was safe, he had gotten ahead of me. I pulled back over into the left lane because I wanted to get his license plate number. In these situations, what I want people to try to keep their wits about them and to do is to get the make and model of the car, and if you can, a license plate number, or at least a partial. So fortunately, because people here drive, wildly slow for the most part, I was able to sort of catch up to him enough to see the license plate and give that to the state troopers that I was on the phone with. And then they instructed me, do not follow closely. I hung back. I went back into the right lane. But and I'm not necessarily recommending you follow somebody, because I don't know that that was smart. But for me, I am a fierce advocate for myself and for others. And I just thought, I'll be damned if this person gets away with what they're doing. Because if he's doing this to me, I'm guaranteeing he's doing this to other people. And I don't know if his intention was to make me think he was a police officer and then pull me over. I'm not sure if his intention was to try to run me off the road. Either way, his intentions were not good. And I was being threatened. So the officers told me that they know who it was because they had the plate number and they were able to figure all that out. And they said, hang back. And eventually this person got off at an exit, and, that was it. So keep in mind all the things that I'm telling you if you're ever in an incident like that. The other tip that I'm going to give people, that if the 911 call hadn't worked, what I would have then done is, again, I know you shouldn't be on your phone when you're driving, but in a dangerous situation, pull up your navigation and put in the nearest police barracks, whatever you call it where you live, the nearest police, the location where police are, go there. Go to a precinct, go to a barracks. So all you have to do is type it in your phone, Google, state troopers, police, whatever, and it'll take you to the nearest location. So if I had called 911 and he didn't stop doing what he was doing, I would have made the additional step of going ahead and doing that. Unfortunately, these are things that we shouldn't have to do. But we are the people who are responsible for keeping ourselves safe, because unfortunately there are a lot of wacky, wacky is a nice word. There's a lot of people in the world who do want to do people harm and who are not well. And, there's a whole host of things, and who are criminals and who just want to hurt people. So, I share my experience, strength, and hope to let people know that I'm okay. I was really rattled afterwards, because that's the thing for me. I'm good in a crisis. And then after, when my body, all the adrenaline has the chance to kind of like settle, then I started to feel really, violated and scared and worried. But don't worry, I have my own Bish therapist that I am going to process that with. And I just really hope that sharing this has helped people understand that, sometimes these things happen, and you really got to work to keep yourself safe. So I hope these tips have helped. So that is going to be it for the show today. I just want to thank you all again so very much for your support, for your kindness, for your love, for making your Bish Therapist podcast part of the top 200 podcast, number 174. I just thank you, thank you, thank you. Please follow me on Instagram. Please subscribe on YouTube, Your Bish Therapist. Please subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I can't wait to bring you all some more Bish week after week. Take care. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and let's be the light in the world that we want to see. And now on to the disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with your Bish Therapist via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance.